This is basically a good antenna, and it's the first antenna that I tested. It doesn't have enough elements on it to give it a lot of natural gain. However, it still will collect signals that are in the air at the height that it is mounted. The amplifier that comes with it will also help you get signal during inclement weather. This is the back of the box if you want to read the specs on the antenna. What I found when I raised the antenna was that it received some channels at different heights that weren't consistently available at all heights. The question is whether or not that's the case because there's not enough signal at different heights or because there's not enough natural gain on this antenna to receive those signals at different heights. It does receive local channels very well and from almost any direction. However, in order to understand that issue with natural gain, I'll have to explain that shortly in more detail, and you'll understand why it's an issue. This chart is a reflection of signal that is available in the air over our area. The negative numbers under noise margin decibels does not denote a lack of signal. I'm going to explain that point to you shortly. But what a lot of people do is they buy an amplified antenna like the one I just showed you, and they display gain in a range. So for example, the one I showed you showed VHF gain as a range of 28 to 32 decibels, and it showed you UHF as 32 to 36 decibels. Okay? The black box that I have highlighted that says NMDB is a pure antenna gain number. There is a difference between amplified gain and signal gain collected over an antenna from the air. Okay? Natural gain in an antenna is the ability of the antenna to draw a signal from the air and allow a TV tuner to receive it. This is typically measured in what's called noise margin gain. That's the black box you see highlighted in the graphic. Okay? Amplifiers do not add receiving signal from the antenna, but they can help strengthen some weaker signals from an antenna just enough that a TV tuner might be able to receive them. The noise margin gain that I've highlighted on that chart is a natural signal gain from an antenna and not an amplified gain like when you add power to the signal. This is why you can't just expect to add power to a signal and receive those other signals because there may not be enough signal in the air to receive them. Amplification can help receive a signal, but that's its limit. It doesn't guarantee that you will receive weaker signals. Hopefully this will help you understand the ratings because some of the numbers they use are amplified numbers as opposed to signal from the air numbers. And where it becomes an issue is when you buy the amplified antenna. In the amplified antenna, like I said, often it'll give you the numbers as a range. The unamplified numbers will give you something like 10 decibels, 12 decibels, or 16 decibels of gain. Now when we go look at this chart again and you see NMDB that I have highlighted in the black box, when you're talking signal from the air numbers, if you were to see that you had an antenna that had 16 decibels of gain and the TV station you're looking at has a rating of -10, technically that antenna should be able to pull in enough, quote, signal from the air to pull in that signal. Anything in the positive range that's not a negative number, you should be able to receive that with a simple over-the-air antenna pointed obviously in the direction of the tower that you intend to receive the signal. Anything in the negative numbers may mean that you have to take other measures in order to receive that signal. So for example, you may seek to combine a couple of antennas, and there may be a variety of factors. It may be that you have to put the antenna up at a certain height and point it in the direction of the receiving tower. It may be that you just simply can't get the signal at all. So hopefully this explains the issue of signal gain to you. Again, anything on an amplified antenna will usually give you gain in numbers that are reflected as a range, as where an antenna that is non-amplified will generally show you numbers that are just a single figure, and that's the number you want to use to interpret this chart. You should now understand the difference between amplified gain and signal from the air gain. Whenever a signal travels down a wire, through a splitter, combiner, coupler, or other medium, there is the potential for signal loss. That's where a preamp might be beneficial. It can be installed at the signal source and amplify the reception signal at its source. The JUICE preamp also filters out interference from LTE wireless providers, such as cell phone carriers, and FM radio stations, effectively cleaning up the signal while it amplifies TV signals. It works better than an amplifier that might be installed near a TV, for example. A little bit about wire, and you'll need to understand this if you're going to be working with this kind of a project. RG59 was a standard originally used for video. It was used in security surveillance type applications, and it was used by your cable companies to transmit video to you. It is seldom used anymore, and it is pretty much same on par with cost with RG6 cable, which is now used by cable companies and internet providers to provide you video and internet services. There is something, if you're going to be doing longer runs, that is designed to give you lower signal loss over longer cable runs, and that's called RG11. But typically RG6 is very sufficient and it's very cost effective. What you see in this picture is an example of the kinds of tools that you might need in order to install an antenna. The red handle tool is called an RG6 wire crimper. The gray tool in the center there is a wire stripping tool, and the connectors to the right are called F-barrel connectors, and they do make them in different grades of wire. One thing I like to do when I install them onto the wire is put a little silicone on the end pieces, not where you have the copper sticking out when you attach the F-barrel connector to the wire, but actually underneath that where it's seated. And that way it helps to waterproof it. And there's one more thing about the use of wire. There are companies now producing what's called copper-clad aluminum. And basically it is a coated wire. And you can use it, but you're going to get more signal loss from it. And I recently found some wire online where they're now making like a steel type of wire that you can use. And the problem with those metals is they're not as conductive as copper, so they result in more signal loss. So you can use it, but just be aware that if you buy those wires, you're not going to get as good a quality as you would if you stayed with pure copper. The Channel Plus splitter / combiner. It is not a typical splitter, and here's the reason. A splitter can be used in such a way that they are designed to work with broadband, making them different. They can result in different signal losses in different ports. And that's what separates this particular combiner from a traditional splitter. Now this can be used as either a splitter or a combiner. It is not an amplifier. Okay? So if you look at the picture where you see the in ports in black, okay, you see about 4 of them. If you were to take antennas, you would channel the wire from the antenna to the black in ports, and then where you see the black out port, you would channel that to whatever it is you want to receive a TV signal on, whether that's to another splitter that you intend to use as a distribution system, to go to your different TVs around your house or whatever else you might connect it to. When you use it as a splitter, you'll notice that where it says out, it is not in black. It is actually not colored at all. Those would be where you're routing it to a device, such as a television. And you'll notice that where it says in is where you would get the receiving signal from. So such as a signal from an antenna would go on that one in port. That's like that. So you use it, basically the black is when you want to use it as a combiner, and the white is when you want to use it as a splitter. And that's how you would use it. Now there is an issue with multipath that you can get when you use multiple antennas together. And what that means is that you may get signal coming from more than one direction. It doesn't mean that will happen to you, but it is possible that you can get signal distortion if you're getting a signal that's bouncing off of something. This is an antenna typically found on places like eBay, and it's marketed under different brand names. This is the GL1000 Plus. It's the same antenna as a lot of other cheaper ones you can find listed on eBay for about $15. Sometimes they're up to $20. When you look at the reflectors, which are those two parts in the center of the photo, they are at the point of that little aluminum piece in the center. That is connected with screws. When you look at the elements that are on the boom, that have the little black pieces on the ends of them, those are also connected with screws. But the antenna itself is pretty solid. It's rated at about 16 decibels. And what's nice about it is that, and by the way, those are non-amplified numbers, but it is nice in the sense that the way it attaches, you can use it on, say, an antenna tower. And it is designed to receive UHF signals, which are better to carry TV signals. Not so good for VHF. Another advantage to Yagis like this, and this is called a Yagi, is that the bandwidth, or I guess I shouldn't use the term bandwidth, but basically the focused angle that it can receive signal is tend to be narrower with this type of antenna, so it can be a little more focused and pull in more signal. When you're using something like, say, a bay antenna, that's wider, and it can receive signal from a wider angle. So, but then again, a Yagi tends to be able to pull in those more distant signals, as opposed to a bay antenna, which is pretty good. It's a good overall antenna, but a Yagi allows you to pull in those more distant signals. Is it a good antenna? I had one similar to this, and one thing I did find when putting it together, you'll notice on the boom there's the end pieces that are black. Sometimes when you go to flare out the boom, you have to adjust those little end pieces, so it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with it or that it should just work out naturally. You may have to adjust those so that you can seat the boom in its proper place before you put on the reflectors and the other pieces that have to go on the antenna itself. I found that I thought it should just open up and put it together that way, but I found I actually had to adjust those little brackets that are on there in order to put the antenna together. So there you have it. That's what you get when you buy that cheap little boom antenna that's on eBay. That's a Yagi. How well does it perform? I had one similar to that, but it was a little better quality. At the ground level, it didn't really receive any signals beyond, say, local channels, the two that we're typically used to, but it received those channels very well. It received those signals very well. How well it will do when it's higher in the air, I really don't know. So we're going to hopefully find out very shortly. This is an antenna's direct antenna, and basically their bay antenna is two of these antennas bracketed together. And there's a lot of people online who say they perform very well. When I look at the numbers that they claim are for gain and I compare them to competitors on solid signal, it seems their competitors from solid signal seem to perform better. But numbers on paper and what they do when you put them up could be two very different things. And there are a lot of people who say that this is a good antenna. So a little plug for those people who've actually tried it. I have not tried it. That bracket on the right there and that bracket just above it is a J-pole mounting bracket. And you can buy those separately anywhere for about $10. In this case, it came with it. If you look at the piece of coax there, there's like a little weather boot. You can also buy those separately that will help protect your connectors on the ends of wires from weather damage. If you look at that little brown, what looks like brown paper in the packaging there, that is to be mounted a special way that goes with the J-mount bracket. Those are to be secured to your roof under the bracket where you attach screws, and there's a specific way that has to be done. I'd recommend you look at YouTube and see how you do that. You can supposedly mount these to a tower, although your range of motion, I don't know how limited that might be in order for your ability to point the antenna in a particular direction. The good thing with this kind of antenna, though, is that the path to receive a signal for it is typically wider than you would get with a Yagi. But you can also buy a rotor for almost any antenna separately if you want to make almost any antenna an omnidirectional antenna. They can easily run you $100 or more, and people only usually buy them if they're going to secure them to like a tower. It might even be more cost effective to do something like I'm going to be doing very shortly, where you take a series of antennas, mount them in different directions, and then attach a signal combiner to them. So that little piece up in the upper left-hand corner, those two little dipoles, that's intended to be mounted at the top of the antenna. It is VHF, but the gain on it is so low that it's really more for localized coverage. It's not really intended to be picking up something that's a distant signal. So I don't know how well this antenna performs. All I can say is there's a lot of people out there who seem to feel that it's a good antenna. This video and everything in it is intended to provide general advice. It is not intended to tell you how to mount or install anything. If you're going to do that, I highly recommend that you do some research so you find out how to do it properly. Any type of antenna that you mount outside should be properly grounded. You might need to look up and find out what a grounding block is. So you need to do some research if you're going to mount any kind of antenna outside. If you're going to use a preamp with a signal combiner, you need to remember to take the coax from the out port on the signal combiner and run it through the preamp, and then from there your preamp will be wired to your household distribution system, whether you run that through a splitter or whether you run that to your television directly. But again, this is just informational only and is not intended to tell you how to specifically install anything. You need to do some research on that and find the ins and outs of all that. The reason I'm showing you this omnidirectional antenna again is basically to tell you to look at the specs and look at where it shows signal gain. And if you see that, you see how it shows VHF and UHF gain as a range. That's a general indication that that measurement is actually amplified gain. And so it's not intended to measure, say, for example, signal over the air gain. They are two different measurements. I hope you found this video useful, and we'll try the experiment. I don't know how well it's going to work, where I combine multiple antennas together and then try to use that juice amplifier. I'm hoping it pulls in more signal. We'll find out. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the video.